Imagine an algorithm just quietly deciding whether a 14-year-old is college material or if they need remedial classes before the teacher has even learned their name.
Yeah, it really sounds like a premise from some dystopian science fiction novel.
Right. But it's actually the invisible reality that's entering classrooms right now. You walk into a modern high school and you see the familiar desks, the whiteboards.
Students chatting before the bell rings, all of that.
Exactly. But beneath that physical surface, there's this really powerful, unseen current of automated systems running everything.
And those systems are fundamentally altering the way we learn, the way we teach, and really how we measure human potential.
They really are. So, welcome to the podcast. Today, we are taking on a highly relevant and honestly pretty urgent conversation about where educational technology, ethics, and justice all collide.
It's a conversation that's happening in staff rooms, at dining tables, and in school board meetings across the country right now.
Definitely. And before we get too far into all those uncomfortable questions, you are experiencing a unique two-voice AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis, presented by Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go.
So glad you brought that up, because the pressure to modernize our schools is just immense right now.
Oh, it's everywhere. But that pressure requires us to look past the shiny marketing brochures of these new digital tools. We have to ask some really hard questions about what we actually value in our educational spaces.
Right. And to guide our discussion today, we're looking closely at a really fascinating and challenging text.
Yes, it's called The Promises and Perils of AI in Education. Ethics and Equity have entered the chat by Ken Shelton and Dee Lanier.
It's just an absolutely vital piece of writing for anyone who's invested in the future of learning.
I mean, the authors aren't just theorists sitting in an ivory tower.
No, not at all. They are longtime educators and equity-focused practitioners. They actually understand how schools operate on the ground level.
Which is so important. So let's start with the common perception. Because when people usually think about artificial intelligence in education, the narrative is almost entirely utilitarian.
Yeah, the broader culture really frames this technology as just a neutral gadget.
Exactly. It's seen as this ultimate efficiency hack. The promise is that teachers can grade essays faster or generate lesson plans in seconds.
Or help students summarize dense articles so they don't have to read the whole thing.
Right. Most of us just treat it like a hyper-advanced calculator. We assume the math is objective, and therefore the tool itself is harmless.
But Shelton and Lanier completely reject that paradigm.
Oh, they tear it down.
They really do. They argue that treating this technology as a mere neutral gadget isn't just factually inaccurate, it's fundamentally dangerous.
Wait, dangerous? How so?
Well, the authors frame the rapid adoption of these tools not as like an administrative upgrade, but as a test.
A test of what? Exactly.
It's a profound test of whether our schools truly value justice, inclusion, and student dignity, or if they just prioritize raw efficiency above all else.
Wow. Okay, so the technology itself cannot be neutral.
Exactly. Because it's created by human beings, right?
Right.
It's trained on historical human data, and it's deployed in a deeply flawed human society.
That immediately shifts the ground right under our feet. Because
Yeah.
if it's not just a fancy efficiency hack, what is the actual promise here?
Well, the book does outline a positive potential, if we actually manage to handle this correctly.
Right, they talk about personalizing learning, democratizing knowledge, and potentially narrowing socioeconomic and opportunity gaps, which, I mean, sounds incredible on paper.
It really does. But they attach a massive, basically non-negotiable condition to that promise.
Right, and what's that condition?
The condition is that the technology cannot lead the way. The promise of democratizing knowledge only materializes if the human elements of teaching remain at the very center of the experience.
So it's like a highly advanced self-driving car, right? It has the potential to get everyone to their destination safely, but only if an educator is still firmly in the driver's seat.
That's a great analogy. The benefits of any technological tool are entirely downstream of whose values we choose to center.
And crucially, whose students we choose to center.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to push back on that slightly, or at least get practical for a second.
Sure, go for it.
If a teacher is using automated software to grade essays or map out a whole curriculum, the software is essentially doing the heavy lifting.
Right.
So how does the book actually expect an educator to stay in the driver's seat when the entire point of the software is to take over the wheel?
Well, staying in the driver's seat requires a complete redesign of pedagogy and assessment. It has to be built around human-centered goals.
Okay, so not just plugging the new tool into the old system.
Exactly. Automating learning simply asks the question, how can we deliver this packet of information to the 50 students as quickly as possible?
Which is what we've been doing for decades.
Right. But humanizing learning, which is what the authors advocate, asks a very different question.
Which is?
It asks, how can we use this tool to understand the unique barriers facing this specific student? And how can we support their individual intellectual journey?
Oh, I see. So if an educator just uses the technology to speed up the old, flawed systems of rote memorization and standardized testing, they aren't in control at all.
No, they're not. They are just letting a faster engine drive them down a dead-end road.
But hold on, if merely turning on this software without completely redesigning your teaching style equals act of harm, as the book suggests, how is a teacher supposed to fix a structural problem from their desk?
That is the big question.
Right. Like, what is the actual danger of just letting the software run in the background? This takes us straight into the perils the book outlines.
And the perils are severe because they're so invisible. Shelton and Lanier detail how blindly trusting these systems reproduces and worsens existing structural inequities.
Okay, what does that actually look like?
We are looking at increased surveillance of students, for one, plus the dangerous practice of labeling and tracking learners.
And fundamentally biased models, making decisions about a student's future. But let's break down the mechanism there, because I think a lot of people struggle with the idea of a biased machine.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive for a lot of folks.
Right, because the machine doesn't have a prejudice. It doesn't look at a student and actively decide to discriminate based on race or class. It's just processing numbers.
Well, the algorithm isn't looking at a student's demographic profile in a vacuum. It's looking at proxy data.
Proxy data? Like what?
It looks at zip codes. It looks at how many times a student has been absent. It looks at historical standardized test scores from their neighborhood.
Oh, wow. So it's pulling all these indirect factors.
Exactly. And the system connects those dots and quietly decides, oh, this student belongs in this slower math group.
So it effectively masks a systemic class issue as a personal math deficiency.
Precisely. The machine is holding up a mirror to our own history. It learns from historical data, and, well, our historical data in education is deeply flawed.
That makes total sense. Think about how major historical events reshape power structures. Like the massive industrial and social shifts during World War II completely altered the global landscape and domestic labor markets.
Absolutely.
In a similar way, the rapid acceleration of educational technology is a historical shift reshaping the power dynamics of the modern classroom.
That's a really sharp parallel. If a system is trained on data that reflects decades of systemic bias regarding who gets disciplined or who gets recommended for advanced classes,
Then that system will naturally replicate those exact same biases.
right. Using artificial intelligence to grade essays is actually a perfect example of this. It's not just about speed.
Oh, I read this part. It's like hiring a copy editor who has only ever read Victorian literature.
Yes, I love that analogy from the book.
Like, if a student writes a brilliant essay using modern, culturally specific vernacular or approaches an argument from a non-Western perspective, that digital editor is going to mark it all as wrong.
Because it penalizes the student simply because their voice doesn't match the system's historical training data.
Exactly. And that is why opaque systems end up rewarding already advantaged learners while treating marginalized students as mere data points.
It's tragic, really. A student stops being a complex young person navigating a difficult world and simply becomes a number on a dashboard.
Just flagged by an algorithm as at risk or underperforming.
Yeah, and that leads us to the surveillance piece.
Right. What does that surveillance actually look like in practice? Because, surveillance sounds like cameras in the hallways, which we are all already used to.
Oh, it's much more intimate than cameras in the hallway. We're talking about remote proctoring software that uses eye tracking to ensure a student isn't cheating during an exam.
Wait, eye tracking? That's terrifying.
It is. If a student looks away from the screen, the software flags them. But the software doesn't know that the student lives in a crowded apartment and looked away because their younger sibling just ran into the room.
Oh, man. So it completely lacks human context.
Entirely. Keystroke logging, sentiment analysis of student emails. These tools condition young people to accept constant, invasive monitoring as just a normal part of existing in a digital space.
That is chilling. It completely changes the relationship between the school and the student from one of support to one of basically suspicion.
Exactly. Which brings us to a major turning point in the author's argument. Because the perils are rooted in structural injustice, the solution has to be structural as well.
Right. So Shelton and Lanier rely heavily on DEIJ, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, to fight these risks.
And they don't just tack on a mandatory ethics chapter at the end of the book to satisfy a publisher, you know?
Right. It's not an afterthought. Equity is the foundation of their entire framework. Like building a house, they aren't just painting the walls with equity after the house is built. Equity is the very foundation.
Every single technological tool they discuss is evaluated through the lens of justice. They force the reader to foreground concepts that are usually afterthoughts in tech adoption.
Things like access, consent, and power dynamics.
Yes. Let's talk about those power dynamics for a second.
Okay, because I get the idea of equity as a foundation, but practically speaking, if I'm a school administrator, I'm buying this software because it's cheap and it saves my teachers 10 hours a week.
Which is a very real, very valid pressure.
Am I supposed to throw that away just because the algorithm is a black box?
Well, the book demands that you ask a different set of questions before you sign that purchase order. You can't just ask if it saves time for the average teacher.
What should they be asking?
You must ask, how does this impact the student who speaks English as a second language? Did the students consent to having their behavioral data scraped and analyzed by a third-party vendor?
Those are tough questions.
And importantly, who holds the power when an algorithm makes a disciplinary recommendation? And what is the appeals process for the student?
It requires a profound professional evolution. The authors are basically asking educators to stop acting like mere consumers of tools.
Exactly. When you're a consumer, you look at the features, you look at the price tag, and you make a transaction.
But Shelton and Lanier are demanding that educators act as ethicists and civic actors.
They call it training your habits of judgment. Before deploying a new software, an educator must evaluate its civic impact.
Will this tool empower students to be better citizens, or will it condition them to accept arbitrary algorithmic authority?
Right. Training habits of judgment means learning to pause, investigate, and sometimes bravely say no to a tool that violates the dignity of the students.
No matter how much time it promises to save the administration.
Exactly.
But I mean, that is an incredibly heavy lift. Teachers are already acting as social workers, curriculum designers, and classroom managers. Now they have to be technology ethicists.
It is a lot to ask.
It really is.
Yeah.
And this brings up a very common and I think very fair critique of this text. Reviewers frequently note that the tone of the book is highly reflective.
It borders on the philosophical at times.
It does. It's packed with critical questions, deep theoretical scenarios, and complex ethical frameworks. However, it's notably light on step-by-step, actionable EdTech tips.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't offer a bulleted list of 5 ways to use this tool tomorrow morning.
It absolutely does not provide that kind of immediate gratification. And for a time-pressed teacher who is exhausted, who has a stack of grading to do, and who genuinely needs to plan a dynamic lesson for Tuesday at 8 in the morning.
The lack of concrete recipes can feel like a massive limitation.
Yeah. So does it fail its audience? If the book tells teachers they are responsible for protecting their students from algorithmic harm, but doesn't give them an exact instruction manual for how to do it safely, isn't that just adding to their anxiety without solving the problem?
It's a vital critique to address. If a reader approaches this book looking for a convenient technical manual, they will absolutely walk away frustrated.
Right.
But if we step back and evaluate the author's core argument, we realize that this lack of recipes isn't a flaw. It's intentionally designed that way.
Intentionally.
In fact, it's the book's greatest strength.
Wait, really? How does not giving instructions become a strength?
Because offering easy recipes would contradict their entire philosophy of training habits of judgment. Recipes bypass critical thinking.
Oh, I see. If you just hand an educator a checklist for using a tool, they remain a consumer.
Exactly. They just follow the steps without interrogating the context. By refusing to hand out easy answers, the book forces the reader into the uncomfortable but necessary space of critical reflection.
So if they give you a recipe, you stop thinking. You stop evaluating the specific student sitting in your room.
Precisely. Every classroom is a unique ecosystem. A software implementation recipe that works perfectly in a well-funded suburban district might be actively harmful in an underfunded urban district.
Because the demographics are different, the resources are different, and the historical traumas are different.
Yes. By providing a philosophical framework instead of a checklist, the book ensures that equity remains the starting lens for every unique policy decision.
It acts as a deliberate speed bump.
That is the perfect way to phrase it. It is a speed bump preventing the careless, rushed adoption that leads straight to the perils of surveillance and structural bias we talked about earlier.
It forces the educator to build their own local solutions based on the specific, vulnerable human beings sitting in front of them, rather than relying on a one-size-fits-all tech industry standard.
Exactly. And this connects so deeply to how we live and how we treat others justly outside the classroom, too.
Oh, for sure. We are all interacting with automated systems every single day.
When we apply for jobs, when we apply for loans, when we curate our news feeds.
If we don't develop these habits of judgment in our educational spaces, we are graduating students who are completely unprepared to navigate a society driven by invisible algorithms.
And that is why the stakes are so high. The authors aren't just trying to fix a grading process, they are trying to protect the civic future of the students.
Because if we condition young people to believe that an algorithm's assessment of their worth is objective and final, we strip them of their agency.
We're basically telling them that their future is predetermined by historical data, rather than shaped by their own capacity for growth and change.
That's a profound thought. So how might you, as a listener, explain or debate this book fairly with others? Let's say you're at a school board meeting, and someone is passionately arguing that the district needs to buy a comprehensive new artificial intelligence suite because it will raise standardized test scores by 5%.
Well, a fair debate starts by acknowledging the other side's strong points. You can validate that saving teacher time and improving baseline metrics are genuinely good goals.
Right. The district is strapped for cash and teachers are burning out. Those are real problems.
But then you apply the framework from the book. You say, I agree we need to support our teachers, but what would change my mind about this specific software is seeing a transparent audit of the data it was trained on.
I need to know how it flags a student for intervention. I need to know that we aren't solving a time management problem by trading away the privacy and dignity of our most vulnerable students.
Exactly. You find a point of agreement that efficiency has value, but you maintain the point of disagreement, that efficiency can never supersede equity.
You insist that the burden of proof is on the technology vendor to prove their tool does not cause harm, rather than putting the burden on the student to survive a biased system.
Well said.
We have covered incredible ground today. We started with the shiny illusion of the classroom efficiency hack and dug all the way down to the bedrock of equity, justice, and historical bias.
We looked at how proxy data punishes marginalized students.
And how the absence of an instruction manual in this book is actually a masterclass in forcing critical thought.
If we synthesize all of these insights, the overarching takeaway is profound. The true impact of this technology in our schools, and really in any part of our society, isn't actually about the software itself.
It's not about the code or the processing speed or the interface.
It is fundamentally about us. It's about whether we have the courage and the ethical clarity to use these tools to humanize the learning experience.
To deepen our connection to one another and to elevate student dignity.
Or conversely, whether we will surrender to convenience, allowing these systems to coldly automate our responsibilities, surveil our communities, and sort young people into predetermined categories of worth.
It's a choice between using technology to build a bridge or using it to build a faster, more efficient sorting machine.
And that choice belongs to all of us educators, parents, students, and citizens.
As we wrap up this conversation, we want to leave you with some tools for your own reflection. We have 3 open questions for you to carry into your own classrooms, your dining room tables, or your study groups. Number 1, when you use or encounter new technology in a learning or working environment whose values are currently sitting in the driver's seat.
Number 2, how can we ensure that the convenience and efficiency of these digital tools do not come at the cost of turning vulnerable individuals into mere data points?
And question number 3, what is one specific way you can apply an equity-first lens the next time you are asked to adopt a new system or process in your own life?
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Keep asking those tough questions, keep challenging the tools placed in front of you, and continue to nourish your mind on the go. Until next time, remember, the most complex, valuable, and irreplaceable processor in any space is still the human mind.